Very, very much. Bernie Sanders, a big critic of the move on the part of the president today, but so was Republican Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, saying he's concerned that this will lead to an escalation in this conflict. He joins us now by phone. Senator, you are saying that U.S. soldiers deserve better than an undeclared war with Iran. Do you think that's what we're looking at here?
I think the problem is that there is an open question whether or not attacks from Iran are more or less likely. You can say that Soleimani was plotting to attack the U.S. May well be true, but with his death, do you think it's more or less likely that Iran and their militias and their proxies will attack the U.S.? I would argue that it's much more likely. And I think as you have an escalation, if they were to kill U.S. soldiers, there will be another response from us, which will be a further escalation. I think without a declaration of war, without Congress and the American people behind it, what you get is a messy mission. You get a mission of escalating intermittent violence, but it really has no purpose or plan, and the country hasn't been told to be united. The president said he didn't want perpetual war in the Middle East, but he's adding more and more troops. If you don't want perpetual war, you don't keep sending more targets over there.
That does sound a lot like Senator Bernie Sanders. Also, presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard, senator, has said that the president has violated the Constitution by declaring an act of war against Iran. Do you agree with that?
Well, here's the question. If you can say that an assassination, which is an act of violence, is not an act of war, what happens when Iran, unfortunately responds and kills some of our soldiers? Will that be an act of war, and will a state of war exist? In the past, when presidents have sent missives to the Congress saying that war exists, they don't ask to declare war. They usually typically write a letter to Congress saying a state of war exists. So I think that may be what happens. If the response to this is an excessive and unfortunate attack on U.S. soldiers, I think a state of war will exist. And so I don't think you can do an assassination with it like this and not think or at least believe that one of the unintended consequences will be war with Iran. So that's why we in the Constitution didn't allow one person to make these decisions. Assassination or however you get involved in war, any of these things were to be done only with the will of Congress as the will of people. And so this was something we adhered to fairly strictly for 150 or more years, and then the last 50 to 100 years we haven't done so well.
Your colleague, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, sir, had said that Soleimani was indeed plotting a coup in Iraq, that this was not an assassination, that he was in Iraq in violation of the UN Security Council travel ban, and that his plot was to kill American soldiers. So we had to take him out. What do you say?
I think that there is evidence that IEDs were planted during the Iraq War that did kill Americans and that they came from Iran. Does Soleimani bear responsibility for that? I would say that there is evidence of that. His planning of attacks now, they've been talking about this for years. He's the one that orchestrates and does direct the different militias and all the different proxy wars throughout the Middle East, so I don't doubt that. But the question is, will there be more or less of these attacks? So what happens with his death is we're sending thousands of more troops, which are thousands of more targets for them to shoot at. And I think that it's hard to imagine that the Iranians are going to shrink now and say, oh, you killed our leading general who's been a leader in our country for 20 years, and we're going to do nothing. I also think with the death of Soleimani, you have the death of diplomacy. I don't think there's any chance that Iran will speak to us again on diplomacy. And this is a long way away from where we were after the nuclear deal was signed under President Obama. I wasn't a fan of the details of the deal, but I was a fan of diplomacy, the same way I've been a fan of the president talking to the government of North Korea, even though we haven't been successful yet. I do think that all talk is gone now. You can't kill a general of a major general of another country and expect that they're going to sit down at the table and discuss with you. There's just no scenario that I see that happening now. So
but even since the signing of that deal, Senator, I mean, Soleimani was instrumental in attacks on American soldiers post even the signing. So what would we have saved if we didn't take him out? What has really changed? Is it your view that this just heightens the possibility of another attack, an escalation of soldiers in the region? What's your biggest fear now?
I think that there will be an escalation, that there will be a war with Iran. I think that as we look at this, it's very hard to see diplomacy going forward in any form or fashion. And really, there hadn't been direct fighting between the Iranian militias and us for the most part. And it's a very messy situation over there, but people tend to want to ignore that actually the Iranian militias, for all their harm, and they have attacked Americans during the Iraq War, in the recent year or so, they've actually been concerned with the same concern we have, and that's been ISIS, Sunni extremists.
Well, have you talked to the president about this, Senator? Any conversations post this attack?
I haven't talked to the president recently about it, but I think he's getting unfortunate counsel from people who've been advocating for regime change in Iraq for years. I mean, Lindsey Graham's been wanting to topple the government in Iran for years. They toppled the government in Iraq, and I think the president realizes that toppling the government in Iraq actually made Iran stronger. In fact, I think one of the ironic things here is that I think the Iraqi parliament will probably now vote for our forces to leave. And so there is some irony to the fact that the hawkish faction that wanted this to happen, they're the ones that want troops to stay forever in Iraq. They actually may be asked to leave because I think anti-American sentiment among the Shia population is on the rise now. And look,
so you think we should abandon the embassy? Do you think we should abandon the embassy altogether, or it sounds like you are walking away?
No, I think that there's no one here mourning for the death of Soleimani, including myself. I think that he is a person who has been involved in the deaths of Americans. I'm also not advocating that we leave the embassy. But I would say that having 5,000 troops over there is not having an embassy. That's having a significant military force that is a significant target. And I do fear that the Iranians are going to escalate this. And the president has shown prudence in the past, and I think really was still keeping the option of diplomacy open. But I think the door has completely shut now in diplomacy because I do not see any avenue or any way that talks could begin again. And I have been one in favor of talks, but I think, unfortunately, diplomacy's dead now in the Middle East with Iran.
Senator Rand Paul, thank you very much for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.